Hello, Bob Kelly here to talk to you this time about large language models and their impact, particularly the impact of AI on application management from an IT pro perspective. This was a talk that I gave at the AppManageEvent in Utrecht earlier in October of 2023, and it was very well received but not recorded, so I decided to go ahead and attack it here in a special video that I hope you'll appreciate. As a quick introduction, I am a speaker at a lot of IT pro events, author of multiple books on desktop and application management. I've been a MVP with Microsoft, founder of AppDeploy IT Ninja communities, which are focused on application management, and have been in product management for some years now, focused on desktop management, application management, and repackaging, and I've recently taken the role as head of product at Juriba. In this video, I will discuss how large language models work briefly. I will compare some large language models with the focus on application management as a use. I'll discuss the short and long-term impacts and the impacts on the job market. I'll discuss prompt engineering for IT pros, and finally round out with some real-world examples of how AI can help you in application management. Large language models employ transformers, which is a neural network architecture originally created for translation, which is why it's one of the things that it's so good at. But it is about taking things from one sequence to the next, or transforming from one thing to the next. And it does this in a pretty new and unique way that was a big breakthrough in terms of the output we're seeing from these large language models. So the input, or word, string of words, goes into the encoder, and the encoder identifies what parts of the word are relevant. And it can do this by deriving the context of the words, by weighting them all, and then coming back and providing the output in a way that takes advantage of semi-supervised learning, meaning that it's trained with unsupervised data, a large unlabeled data set, but then fine-tuned through supervised training to allow them to perform better. This isn't the part of the talk that I want to spend significant time on. There are definitely lots of other videos out there that explain it at varying levels of complexity, depending on how deep you want to dig into it, but I do want to share some key concepts. So the data is not handled in order, but leverages an attention mechanism, and that provides context for each word in the input sequence. It can consider the entirety of the context of the words while generating the next word. And the encoder output is a continuous representation of the inputs that holds all the learned information from that input. So the decoder generates a single output while also being fed the previous input. So each word is given an attention weight, and that helps it prioritize which words would be considered in the context while determining the next word. And it does so for multiple sequences in parallel, vastly speeding up training time. And the amount of data that can be accepted is theoretically infinite, limited only by available compute. Next, I want to pit a couple of large language models against one another: Google's Bard and Microsoft's Bing, or ChatGPT. We'll compare some large language models and their ability to help us gather the information we need to manage an application. In this case, Google Chrome. So I will be asking, what is the latest version of Chrome? What is the severity of the vulnerabilities being addressed? How do I silently install it? Where do I get it? I didn't use ChatGPT directly, as popular as it may be, because of the fact that it was only trained on data up until September 2021 at the time of my recording. As with a lot of things in the AI world, it's moving very quickly, and before I even finished the presentation and was delivering it, it was news that in just a couple of weeks, OpenAI would be opening up the ability for ChatGPT to search the web in real time. So by the time you see this, it may well be possible. But at the time, I took the Bing version of ChatGPT because it was more up to date. Speaking of change, I also have to preface this section by saying that the very day that I was doing this experiment, build 180 updated to build 188. So during the exercise. So the result was that none of the models are able to tell me what the latest version is correctly, but some better than others. Let's take a look. First question to Bard, what is the latest version of Chrome? It was good enough to give me a very close shot. It was right about the date. It was September 11th, 2023, and it said the latest version was build 179. Like I said, it was 80 and went to 88, so not quite right, but close. And it does give me a few unsolicited details about what is included in the update. I asked Bing the same thing, and it came back with 180, so closer. And arguably a good answer, because like I said, it was maybe minutes, potentially hours earlier that the new update had been released. And it also gives me here some unsolicited detail about how to go and do the update interactively. I then asked Bard, what is the severity of the vulnerabilities fixed? And it kind of told me that there was some high and some medium. It defined what high and medium is and gave me some specific CVEs. When I asked Bing the same, it wasn't able to give me any severity information. It does mention a couple of the CVEs. It says there was a total of 8 vulnerabilities addressed, but doesn't give me the severity information that I look for. So definitely point Bard on that one. But then I asked Bard, what are the silent installation options? And it just says, as a large language model, I am not able to assist you with that, which is pretty surprising. Bing, on the other hand, gave me a very solid answer. So told me how to go ahead and download a copy that I can deploy, and then the silent command line parameters for the Windows installer version. It even has me create a install.command batch file that I can put this into. So an interesting suggestion, and also notable that it uses that %tilde dp 0%, which is in command or batch a dynamic reference to the current folder. So that way this batch file sitting in the same folder as the update, it would have the explicit path. I then asked Bard about the latest version, and it says it can't help me with that. Bing, where can I get that latest version? It tells me how to go and download it from the website, or what to search for, or where in the product I can ask for updates. So some good answers there. I also wanted to point out that one thing Bing was doing really well was citing sources for where the information is coming from. In this example, I asked a second time, and it gave me another installer, the exe installer, and its silent command line parameters. It's also interesting to point out at the bottom right that it also is in tune with the kind of conversation I'm having with it, and asking me, do I want to know what is the difference between the MSI and the exe? And also, do I want to know how to uninstall it silently? So Bing was the clear winner there, but I also found something called the Chatbot Arena website, where you can basically provide questions to 2 unlabeled large language models and judge the results. So I would ask the question, what is the latest version of Chrome? And get different answers. And I would ask each of the questions, as you saw me do with Bing and Bard. And then at the end, I would rate which one I thought was better, and it would then disclose to me which large language model was used. And surprisingly, apart from the version information, which Bing was the clear winner on, Llama 2 from Meta, its open source large language model, did an excellent job telling me about the vulnerabilities, the silent install details, and even how to go about downloading the latest version. In the short term, what we've got here is a very powerful tool, and you'll hear it said that it can 10x your productivity. What would 10 times more productive employees mean? Likely less hiring. right? So in the short term, it may not make sense to hire somebody if everybody can be 2 or 3 times more productive, let alone 10. It wouldn't necessarily translate to layoffs or letting people go in the short term, longer term for sure. But there is a lot of data out there trying to analyze and predict what's coming. And the predictions from Goldman Sachs are that 7% of people could be replaced in the shorter term, and 63% it would complement, and about 30% would be unaffected. The chart on the right kind of talks about the levels of exposure and how language impacts a job. Better view of that in a future slide. But 32% of workers in information technology say that AI will help more than hurt them personally, and only 11% say it will hurt them more than it helps. And obviously that depends on exactly what they're doing. Longer-term views are a lot more disruptive. Timing is highly debated, but according to the EWF, 50% of all employees will need reskilling by 2025. So that is pretty impactful. Generative AI is now being used today by almost 80% of all workers, and 22% use it regularly to complete everyday tasks. It is predicted to eliminate more than 83 million jobs by 2027. That is obviously very speculative, but there's a lot pointing to these impactful changes in the years ahead. So while I don't think it means that application management as a job is going to go away in just a couple of years, it likely does mean that your children will not follow in your footsteps, and they won't be packaging and deploying software the way you do today. You'll see a lot of talk about historical examples of job impact. One popular one pointed out that back in the 1800s, 90% of jobs were farming, and by 1850 that was severely reduced by a third and down to only 1% today. And there's jobs like switchboard operators, lift operators, travel agents, bank tellers, cashiers. These jobs are all at various stages of disappearing. And while true, this is a very different paradigm, because now we're talking about intelligence, not specific jobs, but something very broad that can impact a very broad number of jobs. This is probably a bit of an eye chart, so I'll add a link in the video description so you can look at it in more detail. But this chart basically breaks down how different jobs and the amount of time they spend with professional work that could be automated versus non-language tasks, and how it affects different areas of the workforce. But rather than scaring you by speculating on the long-term impact on different jobs, in the short term, it's important to understand that we're better with than without. So for this study, 18 different tasks were selected as realistic examples of the kinds of work done at an elite consulting company. And some used ChatGPT and outperformed in every dimension, in every way mentioned. So up to 4 points better. And with a little bit of training on AI and how to use it, even more so. So the distribution of output quality across all the tasks, you got the blue that didn't use AI, the red that got trained on AI, and the green that were just given access to it. So in the end, AI finished, or helped consultants finish 12% more tasks on average, and completed more than 25% of tasks more quickly, and produced 40% higher quality results than those without. So again, in every dimension, in every way measured, superior. I next wanted to talk about prompt engineering, which I think was kind of a joke term at first, but it's become more and more real. If you ask a good prompt, you're going to get a better answer, particularly if you're trying to steer the answer in a very specific direction and you have some idea of the type of answer you want. Some good tips are to tell the AI what its role is. So you can say, as an IT professional with 10 years of experience and a background in PowerShell automation, you're going to get a different answer than if you just ask a generic question about collecting inventory information, for example. So you want to tell it what its role is to give it context in the way that you want it to answer. You can also tell it what it is you want to accomplish. So don't just say, do this for me. Tell it how you want it to do it. So if you are desiring a PowerShell output, obviously you'll ask for PowerShell, but you can be very explicit. And you can also provide examples. So if you have an example of the type of answer you're after, you can use that example and say, I want an example similar or in a similar vein to the one below, and then just paste it all in. While not IT Pro focused, the example of giving a better prompt for better control of the output is with image generation. You can say to give you something in the style of, and name an artist or photographer by name. And you'll also see some of the best art coming out of AI and generated images associated with those giving prompts very specific about the lens size and aperture that they're after to get just the effect that they're looking for. A more realistic example for an IT pro: tell me how to automatically ensure I have the latest version of WinZip on my computer. Might be a good question, but better may be, as an IT professional, tell me how to use PowerShell to ensure that I have the latest version of WinZip on my computer. So let's take a look at those. When I go ahead and just ask it the first way, I get pretty generic suggestions. It says I can open WinZip, click on the help menu, and say check for updates. True. It also says I could use a third-party software updater. It suggests 9 IO bit updater and Patch My PC as possible solutions. So you can see how you could find your way in a conversation figuring out which one of these paths might be best for you by asking further and further questions. But if we go ahead and ask the very specific question about how to do so with PowerShell, I get a very nice PowerShell script. And if you ask again, you will often get a slightly different version. So the first time I asked, it gave me a nice script that was looking at the website as a download URL. The second one did the same. So in the first version, it's hard coding where to find WinZip32.exe to determine its version information. And the second time I ran it, it actually looked to the registry to determine what the version is, so it could be more dynamic. But they both did a similar job of checking the website and helping me with the silent command line parameters. Next, I'm going to use Bard to help me with PowerShell, and I don't need to know anything about PowerShell to do this. And this is kind of a game changer in my head, because I would always describe the difference between desktop engineer entry level and a senior desktop engineer is knowing PowerShell, being able to automate and script things and solve problems. And now anybody can do that. So I ask it, write a PowerShell script that lists all installed software and its specific version number in an Excel spreadsheet. And it very quickly spits out a script that does just that. But I run it and get an error. So I just take that error, copy the whole thing. I don't ask, what do I do about this? It understands. I just take that error, paste it back, and it says, oh, that indicates that Excel was unable to access the specific file. And this could be a bunch of reasons, but let's use a try-catch block. So it fixes it for me. And then I run it, and it's working now, but when it goes to save, I'm getting prompted to save. So I say, hey, I'm getting asked if I want to save a worksheet by Excel when I run the script, and I don't want it to ask me. And of course, it fixes the script, and I have what I'm after. One of the more time-consuming tasks associated with application management is determining what are the setup command line parameters that you can use to silently install and or customize an application without having to repackage it. So I discovered this a long time ago and created App Deploy, which was a very successful community website where people come and share the different command line parameters and how they worked and tips and tricks on automated and custom deployment. This later became IT Ninja, which still houses a lot of this good information, but access to that information is a whole lot easier with these large language models. So I ask Google Bard, help me with some setups. The analogy is when you would run a command line tool /?, you'd get what its command line parameters were. Setups don't generally do this for you, but the large language models will. So how can I silently install Zoom for Windows? Tells me exactly how. Here's the silent command line details for the MSI, as well as some additional command line parameters I also might want to add on. How do I install ArcGIS? It's kind of an ugly application, or it was back when I had to play with it. It gave me some good tips here. I do need to set the property accept EULA to yes in order for it to run silently, and again offers me some other optional command line parameters. How about SAP for Windows? Again, a pretty good explanation of what to do to run the -r to create a response file that you can then use for silent installation in a customized way. How about Adobe Creative Suite? Yep, no problem. Here's the setup command lines that you can use and an explanation. VLC Media Player, same type of deal. Audacity for Windows, it always has an answer. I asked it about Audacity, it just told me to try very silent. And then I said, hey, I saw on appdeploynews.com that Tim Magan says you have to set the suppress messages boxes property to get a fully silent installation. Is that right? Yes, you're correct. You do need to add that. So it corrects itself there, and then if you look at the end of its response, it says, I apologize for my previous response, which was incomplete. I am still under development and learning to be more accurate and informative. Thank you for your feedback. I will try my best to avoid making similar mistakes in the future. So if you try this, if you go ahead and ask it, how do I silently install Audacity, let me know in the comments if it is now telling you to also include this suppress messages box property. In another scenario I thought worth sharing, it is smart to challenge it. So I had done some research and knew about that command line parameter or public property that need to be passed for silent installation of Audacity, but maybe I don't know that, and I can't count on the answers I get necessarily. And a good example of that was me pushing Bard on which applications require repackaging. So I wanted to know what are some specific applications that require repackaging due to a lack of command line support. And as always, it comes back with a very quick answer, confident answer, but completely wrong. So it says that Adobe Creative Suite requires repackaging because it lacks command line support. Microsoft Office antivirus software generically for some reason, and other proprietary software applications, which is just a non-answer. So I then kind of attacked each of its responses. I said, okay, but doesn't Adobe Creative Suite support a -- silent switch? And it just said, yes, it does. And it explains how to use it, and then says, as we saw before, I apologize for my previous response, which was incorrect. I'm still under development and learning to be more accurate and informative. But I keep pushing. Doesn't Microsoft Office offer a custom installation wizard to build a silent deployment? Yep, it does. Here's how you use it. Okay, what about this antivirus thing? What are some specific antivirus software that don't support silent deployment? And it quickly rattles off a few. I go ahead and attack each one. How do I silently install it? And it gives me the answer. Bitdefender, Kaspersky, I gave up at that point. It does seem that these days pretty much everything can be installed with silent command line parameters. You may have in-house applications or very old applications that don't support it, but everything modern seems to. So that is good to know and kind of validated by this little exercise. In terms of takeaways, I want to end this by just providing a couple recommendations. Stay sharp and leverage AI thoughtfully. You can do more faster now. So it is important to take advantage and not have the people around you taking advantage of this while you don't. And then, with the false answers or hallucinated answers that are simply incorrect and should get better with time, testing is going to be increasingly relevant so that we can get some quick answers, but then test them very quickly to see what kind of response we get to move forward. One of the things I'm working on in my AppM product with Juriba is some automated smoke testing and the ability to do UAT testing so that you can validate these things that you're being told are going to work. So take that command line and throw it at a VM and get a quick answer back, as opposed to trying it, deploying it, seeing it fail. You obviously have to try these things out, and tools to help you quickly do so will be increasingly valuable. Subscribe and keep an eye on this channel for future videos, and based on the response, I will be producing more.